Hello and welcome to this video, and this video is called Music, Life, Death and the Infinite. This video has been prompted by a number of things that have been on my mind recently, that have been going round in here, or is it really going round in here? And that's really what the question of this video is. That's what it's going to ask, is the nature of who we are, the deep philosophical questions, and how that relates to the making of music and the appreciation of music. So we start with a number of events. The first event that we start with is with the news of the death of Robin Lumley, the keyboardist with Brand X. I've actually been this week in discussion with the manager of Brand X, discussing all things Brand X. What an incredible band. And a few years ago, their guitarist John Goodsall passed, and now their keyboardist has passed. And so we really feel that that unit is a living entity, which is still there. I'm not saying it's not there, but it's slowly fading away. I was watching a video with Mike Rutherford, and he was saying about Phil Collins, ever increasing immobility, and so we can see how the legacy of that band is passing into legend, as is a lot of the music we talk about on this channel. And it makes me think of the differences between what is finite and what is infinite. And that's going to be the underlying theme of this video. That's what I've come in here and sat down. I want to talk about music and the idea of the finite and the infinite. I want to touch on a number of recent deaths, Robin Lumley, and I want to touch on Wayne Shorter. The other thing that has popped into my head was a comment that was put up on my YouTube channel about a recent video which hasn't come out yet. It's coming out in a couple of days, where I'm looking at the 20 greatest progressive rock and jazz fusion albums. I've put those two ideas together, and somebody has said, "Oh, why do you keep doing this? Why do you keep trying to create this content?" And I said, well, in the end, those videos aren't really designed for people who watch all the videos on the channel, the hardcore, viewers. They're there to pull new people in, and hopefully they'll get drawn in by the little worm on the end of the little hook that these top 10 videos represent, and they'll watch it and then they'll stay. And then hopefully some of them will end up watching this video, and this is where the hardcore deep stuff is on a video like this. And this video is actually about that very thing, the idea of the esoteric, the idea of things being hidden away, the true meaning of things, the way things can have an apparent illusory view of them, and then inside that can have the true esoteric meaning of that. Something which I think that people who enjoy music, that's a thing that they're very aware of, that a lot of the music we discover on this channel is impenetrable for the outside listener. They don't like it, and we are very aware of that. And it may require work. It requires work and study to go from the outer temple to the inner temple. But that's also framed by the fact that I think these forms of music, which are very intellectually deep, which are emotionally very expressive, are also maligned out in mainstream culture as well. They're not put on the pedestal which we think they should be. All these ideas are there. Also, there's ideas of cultural shifts and changes. And I'd like to start, I think, on this discussion with a film I watched last night, which really prompted me to make this video. And it's the film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood by Quentin Tarantino. Now, I'm not a huge Tarantino fan, but I only really know the early stuff. He's a good filmmaker, but I've always felt he's all a little bit shallow and showy. It's all the illusory outer temple with maybe not so much inside it, This film struck me quite deeply as having, all the showy, very exciting visual and verbal dexterity we associate with Quentin Tarantino. It had all that sort of stuff, you know, great shots of cool looking people walking down cool places with great music playing. That's always been the hallmark of a great Quentin Tarantino film. But for me, it seemed to be exploring the shift from one sort of cultural view of the world to another. It seemed to be dealing with masculinity. There's these two male characters, one who is a real old school man, you know, capable of violence, is a dangerous man. And we're not talking about Charles Manson, we're talking about the Brad Pitt character. And then we have the Leonardo DiCaprio character, who is an actor who tries to play those characters. The dangerous man has got a shadowy past we're not quite sure of. And the actor feels like his career is failing, and they're both sort of seeking redemption in some sort of way. Throughout the film, these two guys are living in a house next door to Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate. So throughout the whole film, there was an uneasy feeling of anxiety, because you know we're going to be moving up towards those horrific murders, where the Manson family, a very strange character in American history, Charles Manson. And for this channel and you know, the content we discuss, also interested in his links to music as well. It seems that Manson, as much as all the beautiful things we discuss on this channel, is also a product of that incredible music scene in the 60s that we go back to over and over again. And so the whole film is foreshadowing a real event. Sharon Tate is portrayed almost like wordlessly, and it seems to reframe our idea of Sharon Tate from being someone who was the victim of a horrendous murder to a joyous, beautiful person that is just, you know, unlike these two male characters, is really enjoying the experience they're having in this new world, in this new culture, right? And it all seems to be about the transference of this up from this old culture to this new culture in Hollywood, which is all about illusion. And so the film flits between the illusory and the real, what's real and what's illusion. The twist of the film is that our two main characters both find redemption in that the violent real man, the old school real man who is capable of dangerous violence, redeems himself by saving the day through the loving relationship he has with his dog. I'm not going to say any more in case you haven't seen it. And Leonardo DiCaprio redeems himself by being a real man of action through his virtuosity with a flamethrower. Because they save the day. The murders never happen. Sharon Tate goes on to live a happy ever after life in this fairy tale, in this illusion that we've grown up with, that we know so well. Throughout the film, that impending sense of foreboding, knowing, and I thought, well, why am I watching this? Because I know where this is going, and the surprise was it didn't go there. It was incredibly violent, but it was violent in a way that saved the day. A very clever comment, I think, from Tarantino on his critics that have had to go in for making such violent content, where he almost in the map puts his critics' voice into the mouths of a member on the Manson family when they say, let's really kill them, because all these actors are the ones who've pretended to kill people and they've taught us how to do it. You know, this idea that through censorship and control we can control people and what they do, and without that they will act like the Manson family, which of course is untrue, because this whole film is a fairy tale of what is. It's a very interesting comment on, I think, who we are and how we exist in this sort of American culture that we've all grown up in, which is, of course, America inflicts its culture on the world through its music and through its film and television, you know. And so most people in most countries know about American culture because of we digest that stuff all day long. And my argument here has been that there is also a very strong thing within rock music, which is the English aesthetic. It's English culture, and that's a very powerful thing that doesn't get discussed so much, and it's different to American culture. All those things I was thinking about, but I want to come back to this foreboding. Over and over again I came back to this foreboding, this sense of terror. I felt genuinely uneasy, and I was sat there watching it going, I'm really panicky about this. I'm really panicky for some reason. Now, I suffer with anxiety, and another event that's happened recently is the slow popularity of a video I filmed, last year, which deals with anxiety and creativity and musicianship, and people seem to be going back to that more and more, because I discussed the link between creativity and anxiety, and I think they're directly linked. And I think once you understand that, it gives you a much more positive view of creativity, right? So I've started this video, I'm going all over the place, aren't I? We've had the death of Robin Lumley, we've had the death of Wayne Shorter, we've got, my need to make popular videos to bring people to watch this channel with the hope that they will then transfer to the inner temple and watch videos like this, where we're dealing with much more heavier subject matter, new subject matter and ideas. And then suddenly I'm talking about American culture, shifts in cultures that's happened from the 60s to now. We're talking about Quentin Tarantino, the nature of violence, how that works, whether we should have censorship, all these things, right? All this stuff is swimming around. I've started this video like this, bang, 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 bang. This guy who said I speak about the same stuff over and over again. I'm not now, am I? Bang, 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 here we go, right? But I keep coming back to this sense of foreboding that this film gave me, this sense of anxiety, this sense of unease. Anyone who's watched that video on anxiety, right, I'm going to change the end credit, so it's going to bring you here. You're now here. So how many of you sat there sharing this existential dread of life, this sense of foreboding, right? Well, the first point I want to make to you is our sense of anxiety and foreboding is rooted ultimately in our concept of death. All anxiety is rooted in the concept that we know we're going to die, and that is embedded in us biologically. Because we don't know what happens when we die, okay? And we're dealing with a concept when we consider it. What we're dealing when we think about death is we're trying to imagine the infinite, and we can't do it. Now, it's the same when we ask questions about God. It's the same when we ask questions about consciousness. It's the same when we ask questions about space and the universe and the nature of the universe, the limits of the universe, the limits of time. We come up against the infinite and we can't understand the infinite. Why is this relative to this channel? Or why does it relate to this channel? I'm going to get there, but remember, you're watching one of these esoteric videos. We're moving into the inner temple, so bear with me with this. We have the infinite and we have the finite. When we consider death, we're considering both of those things. For human beings, there's a huge curiosity. Well, you can find out right now by committing suicide. Human beings would not survive if we weren't implanted with an anxiety and fear of anything that will cause our death. It's part of the biological process. It's wired into us, from a pure evolutionary materialist view, and I'm going to be dealing with materialism on this video as well, but from a purely materialist view, we are dealing biologically with a emotion that's evolved within us to keep us alive so we can get to adulthood and reproduce. It has to be there. If you were God designing little human beings and you plopped them on the earth and you wonder why they were walking around out of curiosity killing themselves every few seconds, you would go, I've got to do something. And also when the big lion comes along, they don't run away, and they see the big cliff and they go, oh, I wonder what it would be like to jump off the cliff. And they do it. I've got to stop him from doing it. So as you can see, all anxiety, all fear is rooted in the fear of death. That doesn't seem apparent because most of us feel a lot of the time especially creative people, that our fear is rooted in the idea of ourselves and how we view ourselves and how other people will view ourselves. You know, musicians torture themselves because they are terrified of the idea of how other people will perceive their art. And the answer for most musicians to that is to try and be as a perfectionist as possible. Now, perfectionism, I'm going to argue in a minute, is rooted in the finite. Okay? Order, the idea of order, is rooted in the finite. It's the safety of limits. But the ultimate limit is our time span here. It's our death. So those two things mesh together. It's a terrifying thing. Why is our self-consciousness rooted in perfectionism? Because we believe through perfectionism people won't be able to criticise us. There's a huge fear of being criticised, of being told we're not good enough, that we shouldn't be playing this game. That's the big fear of artists, and I talk about that in depth on the other video. Why would that be? Well, again, let's get raw materialist, because I don't want to go off on airy-fairy spiritualist, ideas on this. I want this to be rooted in reality. I want the hardcore atheists to get something out of this, as well as those who fervently believe in God and the power of spirits. I want to talk to all of you on this, because the great thing that we all can appreciate is music. So, why is self-consciousness like death? Well, because if we do something wrong in society, in our culture, we will be, by the rest of the group, sent away. And throughout most of history, and even to now, today, to be honest, if our culture that we want to be a part of puts us outside of that, you are dead. In the old days, of course, once they sent you out the cave for doing something wrong and you wandered off in the wilderness, you had probably just a few days to go. Some genius, brilliant people with new ideas may have been able to go off and set something up new, some new society or whatever. That's a whole new video. That's like a whole new world of those characters that can do that. That's the creative impulse of humans. That's the thing that's got us here. This is the powerful stuff. So, I hope you can see that all your fears or anxieties are a fear of death. And we often seek solace in perfectionism in order to try and overcome that fear. It's the idea of control. If we can control things, then the fear will go away. The control is all about trying to create order. It's always about order. Order's rooted in perfectionism, and perfectionism is rooted in the finite, what we can measure. You cannot have order when you cannot put a boundary around something and say that is that. If you're going to get up in the morning and tidy your room, as we've been told by various people, who would like to discuss order and chaos, then of course we have to know when the morning is, and we have to do it by that time. We can't do it in an infinite amount of time. It has to be done now, and it has to be done in a certain way, in a measurable way. We have to decide, what making the bed is, and we have to make sure that criteria is fulfilled by what we've done, because getting up in the morning and just breaking down and splashing our own feces against the wall does not equate making the bed. However creative we want to be, that order is really important. So I'm now going to move on to another thing that I want to discuss that's been prompted recently, because there's specific things I want to discuss. I firstly want to discuss Once Upon a Time in America and touch on that sort of the idea of these cultures shifting and these sort of archetypes, and these ideas of masculinity that have been eroded away. I also now want to talk about Wayne Shorter, the great Wayne Shorter, who passed recently. I did a video about it, about his death, and spoke about how much I loved him. I've also spoken about Wayne Shorter in a recent interview with Tom Alexander, which Still wasn't enough, so I'm going to talk about Wayne Shorter now. One thing I didn't talk about was his Buddhism. This idea that the world is full of suffering and all we can really do is try and work on ourselves, you know, to try and behave in the right way. How can we behave in the right way to become a good person, which I think was Wayne Shorter's mission statement with his art. One way would be to speak no evil, you know, to not talk bad of people, to exist in a sort of a state of non-judgment, to live in the moment, to exist in a mindful state. All these things that we try and achieve ourselves. Now, when Wayne Shorter died, I think the most notable thing that happened to him in terms of my experience in recent years, not talking about Weather Report, not talking about Miles Davis Quintet, but in recent years, was the furore that blew up when the saxophone player Alex Hoffman on Facebook, after seeing a Wayne Shorter concert, posted the comment "F you." He didn't actually write "F you." You've got to fill it in. I'm not going to say that word on my channel. But he said "F you, Wayne Shorter." This created a huge, big furore in the jazz world, and this was 10 years ago. This happened. This was absolutely everywhere, and I didn't know whether I wanted to bring that up again. And I wish no badness to Alex Hoffman, who is a fantastic saxophone player himself. But at the time, I remember watching an interview with Alex Hoffman, which you'll be able to find, where he defends himself. And throughout that video, he talks about order and the way that jazz should be played. The word should was used over and over again. At one point, he talks about abolishing religious systems, of abolishing this. He talks from he comes from a completely materialist view, where he thinks that things should be measured empirically. Right, he wants to take that finite ruler of order and apply it to jazz. He believes that a jazz musician should know why they're playing that note. He believes that people should never employ histrionics when they play. The emotions should be kept under control. He believes that Charlie Parker and Lester Young played and they wanted the audience to politely clap. They didn't want the audience to scream, because they weren't interested in the emotion. They weren't interested in the Dionysus expression of being alive. They were interested in the exposition of order, right? There's a chord, there's a C7 chord moving to an F major. I'm quoting him exactly here. And there's a way of playing the notes that harmonically go with that chord. Harmony being the great Pythagorean grid of perfection. Right? The things that places us, the things that roots us into the world. The materialist idea that there is just one substance. And the world's made out of it, and it's entirely measurable. It's entirely measurable in space and time. But there's a problem, isn't there? Because space... what is space? How long does it go on for? Does it stop or go on forever? Or will it just go around in a big circle? And what about time? If we go back in time, what are we actually doing? Because back is space. It's not time. Is there a back in time? Or is it there? And if we could go back in time, when we get to the beginning of time, at the beginning of the Big Bang, was there really no time before that? Can we be sure? And how long will time go on for? And if it is a huge big circle, do we really not die, but just live our lives over and over again, like a part of a huge wave, a huge breath that's being breathed in and out? Is surely not the expansion of the universe that cannot be explained by scientists, that rapid expansion as everything moves away from itself, you know, with energies and forces that can't be explained, which seems like the huge exhalation of some huge unit that will then breathe it all back in. And we are all just conscious blips on this floating wave of space and time. This is what you want to root your order in. The thing that we can't explain at all. That sense of the infinite, okay, which Alex Hoffman seems to have no concept of whatsoever. He seems to have no concept of the Dionysian in art. He seems to have no concept that art is human beings' way of dealing with the contradiction between the finite and the infinite, the contradiction between chaos and order, the contradiction between outward emotional expression and the exposition of perfectionism. All art is trying to balance that in some way. The artist that goes too far towards order and perfectionism no longer understands what art is. This would be my answer to Alex Hoffman. And is that you do not understand what art is. Wayne Shorter has a greater understanding of art, and you are arguing from a point of view which is ignorant, because you haven't got to that point. And your wonder of these musicians that you criticise, Herbie Hancock, Greg Osby, Steve Coleman, you know, these musicians that you felt weren't playing the jazz as it should be played. Every time I say the word should, well, I'll try. Well, I'm just not that old enough, but I'm always amplifying that word here, the word should, because the word should points to the infinite, doesn't it? It points to a non-material world that exists somewhere else, that somewhere else there's another world where another thing could happen. And what should be happening in our materialist world is that the material world should line up with, see, I just did it then, the material world should line up with this other imaginary world or other world where everything's perfect. The demiurge in Plato, the realm of perfection, the idea of heaven in religious systems. You know, the idea that there's this ultimate place of ultimate good and perfection, which we as the fallen, dirty, rotten human beings, we have to, you know, try and lift ourselves up to that. You know, we can't stand up as gods. We can't stand on the mountain and scream, I am here and I am now, and there is no perfection. There is no other place. There is just this material place, this one universe that we exist in. Right, you see, the materialists can't have materialism. They can't have it. If they accept that the world is material, right, then they are accepting that everything is material. All the thoughts in my brain are material, that my consciousness is material. And it's very hard to argue that it's not the other way around and that all the materialism is inside my consciousness. Consciousness is a product of this one universe, as much as rocks and pebbles and black holes are, and dark matter and strings. All of these things exist. Dragons exist in the material world. Griffins exist in the material world. Frodo Baggins is a real character that exists. It's just they don't exist in the same way as other characters exist. But if you believe in the material world, you cannot divide one from the other. If you want to divide one from the other, now you're dividing between mind and matter. The mind and the matter. And we start to get these binaries. And these binaries will always relate to the infinite and the finite. And remember, we're terrified of the infinite. And we're terrified of the finite because they're embodied in our culture, in us, in our death. When we consider our death, which will happen to all of us, okay? When we consider our death, we are considering the fact that we are living in a finite system, that we know had a beginning and we know will have an end. It's our ultimate beginning and our ultimate end. And that system, right, when we confront that, whatever happens, we will then have to enter into the world of the infinite, which we can't even imagine. If you believe in an afterlife, then that afterlife will either be an infinite afterlife or it will be another chapter in an infinite amount of chapters. And that's terrifying. That is fundamentally terrifying. Those of you who believe that you will end up sitting on clouds eating grapes and soft cheese, you know, while somebody strums a harp, I could take that for a bit, because of course the real fear is the infinite. Anything, even ultimate pleasure forever, is terrifying. Those of you who think that when you die it's much like what happens to you when you go under general anaesthetic, in other words, time and space stops, we can all handle that, can't we? As long as it's a finite all time and space stopping, which is what happens when you go under a general anaesthetic, hopefully. But for those of us who those of people who've gone through that and died, perhaps that lack of time and space goes on forever, and that again is terrifying. The infinite is terrifying. The infinite is the thing that moves us down in our stomachs. Right, so I've spoken to half an hour about all these philosophical questions, and I've dealt with a whole bunch of things. That fear of death, that anxiety, that pondering on the infinite and the finite, okay, that's what's embedded in many art forms when they are being high art. It's a, you see, there I am struggling, trying to describe something very difficult. And as I'm describing, the universe comes along and makes a comment. Or was it just me thinking it made a comment? And in this case, our description of what the universe is has just literally collapsed before your very eyes. To such an extent that this book that I propped up is now broken. The finite case which contained humans' attempt to create an ordered structure, I cannot put it up there anymore because it's wrecked, it's destroyed. This, as we reach the halfway limit of this video, is the turning point where you see me go, right, something's happened. Andy's sense of order is now being thrown out the window as he now changed his tack completely from that little event that we're all aware of, that little event that happened in the world, right? That little event that has meaning. Now, some of you are going to say, well, Andy's going to make meaning out of that event. That was just a random event. In the background, I can hear the church bells ringing. The call to worship. People are putting on their ties, putting on their jackets to go to church. I'm wearing my jacket today. I never wear this jacket. I thought I'd get dressed up for this video because it was like I'm going to church. But I didn't know those bells were going to ring. I didn't know the bells would ring at the same time that book would collapse and destroy itself. The materialists out there can only explain it in this way. That when the Big Bang happened and all those subatomic particles were scattered, and within the hot soup of that realm they formed into hydrogen atoms that then swirled around the universe and gathered themselves into big chunks which collapsed in on themselves, forming stars, throwing out photons and producing helium atoms, which then grew larger and larger and then exploded, spewing out the elements that create the universe in a spiral of energy forces, energies that cannot be created or destroyed, that create a chain reaction of events which throughout the universe's history is always expanding. Hydrogen atoms become helium atoms become carbon atoms become iron atoms, and the world is now populated with atoms, all different elements. The elements survive, combined through the through energy processes into compounds. Compounds become rocks and sand, and they become water, and they become the material world that we're made out of. But these elements become more and more complex rocks. They form into plants. Plants turn into animals. Animals create consciousness. Consciousness emerges as a product of the universe. And those chain reactions that went into making the cardboard, the carbon that's in the paper in the cardboard, all the thoughts, all the consciousness, it's on the words on that book, and all the energy movements and cycles that are now working on that book as it stands there on my speaker, right? Stands there, and it cannot just be static, because nothing in the universe is. Everything in the universe is moving upwards. It's moving upwards on a scale. The law of 7, on a scale that ascends as we ascend through from the low to the high. Everything is trying to move upwards. It's counterintuitive, right? We would assume that after an explosion like the Big Bang, we would go into a process of entropy and everything would be dropping down, but it's not. It's moving up, isn't it? And right at the top of that, as far as we're concerned, is human beings, human life, and our consciousness that contains Frodo Baggins and contains griffins and contains dragons. And in a material world, those things are real things that exist in that world. And that scale goes up. And all those energies are swirling round to create at that moment on my video the event that just happened, that seems in my consciousness to be so meaningful that the order that I'm trying to apply to this video, I then abandon, right? Because in that sort of Buddhist, mindful, Wayne Shorter way, I want to be open to what's happening. I want to take the event that just happened in the middle of this video of the church bells ringing at the exact same time and see that the book of science and the idea of religion, those two things existing at the same time, and the fight between them, the fight between the rational and the irrational, the fight between fantasy and reality, the fight between chaos and order, the fight between the infinite and the finite, that this is the grand theme of the universe when we look at it. And we see within that is the drive to things to open up and open like a flower, the flower of consciousness, the consciousness that I have in my mind, the reality that the whole universe is actually my consciousness, that the material world is actually within my consciousness. This is a statement of fact. It can't be any other way around, right? Anybody who applies the rational rules of the logic will see that first and foremost, the material world exists in my consciousness. I then have to say, and I then assume that my consciousness exists in the material world. All right? These considerations, right? This is the grand narrative, which I believe is the stuff of art and music. Okay? That is why I think I like that Quentin Tarantino film. That is why I think Wayne Shorter is a greater artist than Alex Hoffman. All right? That is why when we consider the legacy of the music we discuss on this channel and the thing that we're going through at the moment where so many of the people who made this incredible music are now at an age where they are passing on. And most recently, it's the great Robin Lumley that I dedicate this video to, the keyboardist with Brand X. And behind me I have a Brand X album. Moroccan roll. That pun that's embodied with here. Which embodies the idea of high art and low art, and the cover that wants to take that environment and twist it on its side, to turn it upside down. This is what art discusses. It always discusses these things. The desire of musicians like Robin Lumley to give their whole life over trying to describe this, even if it means you don't have the health and wealth required to live a good life. Most musicians are tortured. Most musicians don't make enough money. They live unhealthy lifestyles. They're on the road. They're surrounded by lots of alcohol. They smoke too much. And what we're seeing now, as they get into their 70s, is that they're many of them are not lasting as long as people in other professions, and they're passing on. So now we do come to this idea of death and the fear that it has, this idea of the infinite and the finite, and how that relates to music, how that relates to art. I think it's integral. I think it's actually a part of what music does. I think that the musician who is driven to solve aesthetic problems, okay? That's what an artist is. An artist can't sit there and just be happy. All right? The artist has to come into a room like this and has to position things in that room, which is what I did before I started this video, so that things would have meaning, more than what I'm talking about. Trying to use the room to help me. The room's not good enough. Life's not good enough. It needs to be arranged. It needs to be arranged in a way that has meaning. Right? That arrangement is going to be an arrangement that tries to balance chaos and order. If you balance chaos and order correctly, it creates an aesthetic feeling. That feeling in the artist who creates that fights against the horrible feeling of anxiety. Anxiety is the foreboding of the future. It's the awareness of the finite in our future. It's trying to avoid that at all costs. The artist gets respite from that by entering into the now, of forgetting about the finite and actually bathing in the infinite, truly bathing in infinite without questioning it. Something that I think Wayne Shorter was a genius at. In doing that, they get respite from that feeling. So my whole central thesis of the video I did on anxiety was that musicians that suffer from anxiety, the cure is to be creative. And to be creative, you have to fight against the demon of perfectionism. Okay? To achieve your artistic goals, you will have to be ordered, which musicians aren't. They're terrible at using order to have a plan to create something that actually gets out into the world. They sabotage their art entering into the world, which is their legacy. They sabotage it through their perfectionism of how they believe they will be perceived by the culture. All right, and in this video, I've sort of tried to discuss culture in the terms of that Quentin Tarantino film, because culture is an illusion at best. It's something that we need to keep at arm's length at best. The culture wars that go on, they're literally illusory wars. The artist needs to be able to get their art out, and their art has to live, because art lives out in the world. It has legs. Art has so much legs that all these great artists have had an effect on me so deeply that now I have this channel, right? Because my whole life has been given over to music. And so I have a channel where I discuss this, and now this channel has become something financially that I have to actually rely on. Not completely, I wish it was, but it's not. But it's still enough of a concern that I have to consider material things like making videos that people will actually want to watch. I have to think of how to enter into that culture in the same way that Hollywood films do. I have to become, in a way, what Hollywood is, what Quentin Tarantino is exploring in that film, that illusory nature. You know, that there's me here with my objective, platonic, perfect top tens that everyone wants to come and question because they're not perfect and they're not objective. And we keep coming back to this idea over and over again. You know, we're around this illusory circle here where I say these are the 10 greatest albums in whatever genre, and then people come along and go, no, they're not. Yes, they are. No, they're not. It's objective. It's subjective. It's perfect. No, it's not. It's just your emotional response. It's not an infinite list that will go on forever. It's a finite list. But I have to do it. I have to enter into that business. I have to try and get people in their lives to enter into that commercial world, because I make money because they stick adverts on it. And there's a huge system analysing who you are and what you like. There's a progressive rock fan there, so they're probably, you know, middle-aged at least, you know, and they probably work in some sort of anal retentive job like computer programming or something like that, perhaps, you know, and they're analysing you in that way. I might sell them the new Apple Watch. Let's stick it on Andrew's video, because we know they're all watching, and they do watch for a good 10-15 minutes before they switch it off, so they're obviously being pulled in by something, and then I get money for it. And the money keeps me alive. I can then buy food and put it in my mouth, and I can put it in my kid's mouth. Right, and we can survive, and we can put off the horrible demon of death. Right, and that fear drives me to come in here, even when it's freezing cold, even when I don't quite want to do the video, I'll come in here and I'll do the talk. Well, I wanted to do this one. I really wanted to do this one. And the reason why you heard the bells going off is because it's early here, Sunday morning. You know, and I got up early and I got myself together because I really wanted to discuss this esoteric idea of the finite, of death, and how it relates to music, how it's embodied inside music, and how musicians have that dream, which is where we come into at the end of this video, that if they are able to create this thing that balances the finite and the infinite, if they can create a unique balance of perfectionism and expressionism that actually can, and this is the most difficult bit, penetrate beyond culture, right? Which is what's in that Quentin Tarantino film. He's discussing all this ephemera of 1960s Hollywood, ephemera that people have forgotten about. The Manson murders, they have gone into our culture. They've managed to bust outside of our culture and permeate future cultures. But most art lives and dies in the moment it's created. Okay? A big criticism, if I was using my knowledge of philosophy, if I was objecting to what I do here, right, I would say this: you guys like Andy Edwards and like Rick Beato and all these older guys that are there, you know, making videos for an older audience where we celebrate the wonders of this great music from the past, and we go, look at all this great music from the past. Wasn't it better? It's so much better than modern music now, right? But what you're doing, if I was criticising myself, remember, what you're doing is you are cherry picking. You know, because most of the time, if you go back to 1973 and look at what was in the charts in the UK and America, it's nothing that you're covering. All this music was actually quite esoteric in nature at the time, but it's managed to permeate and burst out of the cultural framework within which it was made. It's lived on, right? It has some afterlife. And I feel that this is very, very important. What I discuss on this channel, I hope, are the aesthetic qualities of this music, and I argue why it should be looked after and cherished. Okay? I've always believed that when you go back in time and you look at a music from a certain period, like the late Renaissance, early Enlightenment period music, we do not listen to the big popular composers like Salieri. We listen to the Mozarts. You know, that it won't be the huge selling artists of today. It won't be the Nicki Minaj's and the I don't even know who they are. I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to come up with a really contemporary artist that we know will be here today and gone in a few months. That's why it's really hard for us older people to come up with these artists, because in the framework, our time framework, they're here and they're gone. No, I think we'll look back as we do, and we will point to certain albums, and those albums will have discussed something that is outside just the narrow cultural framework, and that cultural framework is the framework that produced them, but it basically describes something which we can call the sublime. And the sublime is the beautiful balance between the finite and the infinite in aesthetic terms. Most people, if they've had a lovely day on holiday and they sit down in the chair and they watch the sun go down, they feel at that moment the sublime. And that what that is the feeling of being in that moment, that unique moment, but being part of a system which has gone on forever. I think that's what the feeling is, and it's awe-inspiring. And what it does is it makes us feel that we fit into a system, and that we belong to be. We belong there. We belong in this system, whatever it is. We don't understand it, but we belong in it. You belong in it. I belong in it. All right. All the dirty, rotten religions that want to say we've fallen from grace. You know, all the Alex Hoffmans that say we should be doing it this way, and if we're not doing it right, and we should be cast off into hell. You know, because for all his materialist, you know, protestations, that is what he is saying. No, we belong here. I'm with Wayne Shorter. We belong here. All you've got to do is open our eyes and see it. Okay? And death, I know why I'm frightened of death. It's to keep me alive so I can have more of this here. More of this wonder here. But at some point, we will pass on. We will move on. A funny aside. Part of the thing that prompted this video was when I've just made a video, this big video, and I'm hoping on Friday it will come out, this video, which is the top 20 progressive rock and jazz rock albums. It will come out Friday, and the YouTube algorithm go, ooh, Andy's doing what we like. Look over there, he's actually done another top 20. He's done a top 20. That's double 10. Well, I'll point even more people in there. Come on, everybody. Come and look at Andy's video. He's doing what we want. He's doing the thing that we can stick the adverts on, right? That's what I'm hoping will happen. But the lighting went wrong on it. Right, and I don't know what it was. I put a light in the room. I sometimes worry that things are a bit too dark. And this often happens with the idea. I'm not a professional, right? And sometimes the things are a bit too dark. So I put a light on. I look like a ghost. I look like death in this video. I'm hoping on this one I don't look like death. Do I look a little bit less cadaverous? I hope I do. You know, if you watch this video, you can see over the last couple of years that I'm getting greyer, I'm getting older. As you watch these things, I am moving inexorably towards my own finite lack of existence in this world. You're watching it happen, you know, and every time I put the videos on, and then an old video come up from a couple of years ago, you know, when I had great long hair and I looked like a wizard, you know, that worked for the algorithm so much more, you know. I didn't want to look like a wizard. I thought maybe I can look a little bit younger. But now it's really going white, isn't it? God, look at that. You know, we all live in this existence, but we belong in it. We belong in it. And music at its best does that. And Robin Lumley, the incredible keyboardist, not that well known, but the incredible keyboardist is Brand X, whose life was given over to this, and has made incredible albums like this one. You know, Brand X were a band that just routinely hits at a high level. There's no duds in that catalogue at all. You know, they were routinely brilliant. And they changed their sound and they changed what they did. But they really were one of the great fusion bands. We need to celebrate these people. We need to keep the legacy going. And we need to realise that these people aren't dead, because these people are real and they exist. And while we're thinking about them and talking about them, and while we're listening to Wayne Shorter and really understanding what he achieved, and that music goes beyond order and shoulds, it's an expression of something much higher than that. And that's an esoteric thing that we reach for. And if we can focus on those things, if we can really see the value in those things, and we can discuss it, somebody's on the channel, that talking about music's a waste of time. No, it's not. Okay? Art and music gives you a feeling, without a doubt. And this has been scientifically proved. You will get motivated when you listen to music. That's basically what art does. It motivates you. Right, but talking about good music also motivates you. Right, the art is that great that you get a feeling, the feeling that you get from great art, you get that when you watch this channel. When I discuss it, this is what you come for, and I'm really aware of trying to discuss it in a way which promotes those feelings. I've tried to take you on a journey, and I'm trying to land you here at the end of this video, going away with that uplifting feeling, going, yeah, I am a part of the universe. I understand where I fit. I do have a fear of death. I do have a fear of these things. I worry about keeping my family going, of making money, of struggling against all these things out there. But when I put this music on, that music reminds me of something else that cannot be described, because it's describing the infinite. The infinite is something that gives us the feeling, right? It's terrifying and it's beautiful at the same time. And great art perhaps shows you the beauty of the infinite in a way that it becomes less terrifying. Now, I'm going to end with this. I have been all my life a self-proclaimed atheist. Through this channel, I came into contact with my hero, Narada Michael Walden. I watched that video again yesterday, and I sent Narada a message. And as soon as I did, he sent me love back in that message. It's a very strange thing, like that book falling down. It's a very strange thing that I've actually managed to make contact with that person that at once was just a person in my brain, was just a person in my consciousness. They were a figure that I used to elevate myself. In my interview with Narada, he discusses the fact that God is the infinite. And it made me realise the question of whether God exists is a stupid question, because it's like asking whether the infinite exists. It's a name that we've come up with something. Of course the infinite exists, and we don't know what it is. There is a thing in our life that I've been talking about throughout this video. There's a thing that's there, and it's the totality of everything, and we don't understand it. Now the big question is if we put our hands together and we show love for that thing, the acceptance of this thing that we're in, the surrender to that thing, right? If we surrender to that thing, whatever it is, will it answer us back? That's what I set out to do today. But of course, you just saw that it did, didn't you? Strange, isn't it? I think I've come to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this video, then like it. If you want more stuff like this, then subscribe, because I won't just do top 10 videos. And often when I put up a big top 10 designed to get the viewers, there will also be something right next to it where I go off on a tangent. I don't even really feel like I've talked about music much here. I'll put music in the title. I'll put prog in the title. Top 10 reasons why we should discuss the infinite and music. There we go. That might be a good title. But any road. I will always try and discuss these things. So if you want to know when these videos are there and when they're coming out, then the notification bell, click that. If you want to enter into my esoteric world and go deep down, right, then become a Patreon. And there's a ton of stuff. I put a lot of stuff on Patreon now, a lot of stuff. There's probably as much stuff going up there as goes up on this channel, but it is much more wider ranging. There's articles, there's video of me playing, there's I play my records, I put on stuff and just listen to it, and also there are Patreon exclusive videos. And in some cases, those Patreon exclusive videos are videos where experiments, and I just didn't feel that they quite worked on the main channel. Anyway, there we go. That was a weird one, wasn't it? Oh, and I kicked the camera. Okay, thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video. Bye.